the God of the Old Testament, loving Father or tyrannical warlord. Millions of people today worship a God they believe to be infinitely loving, merciful, and just. They call him Jehovah or Yahweh, names used in ancient texts to refer to the God of Israel. These believers, whether Christian, Jewish, or part of newer sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses, often speak of their God as a caring father, a source of moral guidance, and the very embodiment of love. But there's a profound contradiction here, one that becomes impossible to ignore when we examine the actual biblical record, because the Old Testament, where the figure of Yahweh is most vividly presented, doesn't paint a picture of a gentle, loving deity. Instead, it introduces a God who is violent, authoritarian, tribalistic, and frequently cruel. A God who commands genocides, punishes generations for the sins of their ancestors, and exhibits extreme emotional volatility. This raises a critical question. How can so many people in the modern world continue to revere this deity as a moral ideal? Is it a matter of selective reading, indoctrination, or a refusal to face the darker realities of religious tradition? Let's examine the evidence, straight from the Bible. A God of love, who commands slaughter. One of the most common descriptions believers give of Yahweh is that he is a God of love. But if we take even a cursory look at the Torah and the historical books of the Old Testament, we see a deity whose actions contradict this claim at nearly every turn. Consider Deuteronomy 20 verses 16 to 18. Yahweh commands the Israelites, "You shall not leave alive anything that breathes. You shall utterly destroy them, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things." This is a direct command to commit genocide, wiping out entire cities, including women, children, the elderly, and even animals, all in the name of religious purity. The rationale is fear. Yahweh wants to prevent the Israelites from being influenced by foreign practices, so the solution is total extermination. This is not the language of tolerance, mercy, or love. This is the voice of a jealous war god who cannot stand competition, the kind of deity ancient tribes believed needed blood to remain appeased. The plagues of Egypt, justice or mass punishment. Another example often cited to praise Yahweh is the Exodus story. He delivers the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, an act seen as heroic and compassionate. But take a closer look. In Exodus 7-12, Yahweh repeatedly hardens Pharaoh's heart so that he will not let the people go, even when Pharaoh initially seems inclined to do so. Why? So that Yahweh can display his power through more and more devastating plagues. What follows is a campaign of ecological and human destruction. Water turned to blood, infestations of frogs and locusts, disease, darkness, and finally, the killing of every firstborn in Egypt, including children and infants who had nothing to do with Pharaoh's decisions. This is not justice. This is divine spectacle, a performance of raw power at the expense of innocent lives. If any modern leader acted in this way, we would call them a war criminal, not a savior. Yahweh's temper, quick to anger, slow to forgive. One of the most troubling characteristics of Yahweh in the Old Testament is his emotional instability. Despite being described as slow to anger in some poetic passages, his behavior is often the opposite. In Numbers 16, when a group of Israelites challenges Moses and Aaron, Yahweh's response is not dialogue, not patience, but mass slaughter. The earth opens and swallows entire families. Fire consumes 250 more. Then, when the people complain about this horror, Yahweh sends a plague that kills 14,700 of them. This is not the reaction of a wise, compassionate God. It's the tantrum of a tyrant who demands unquestioning loyalty and punishes dissent with death. Punishing the innocent. Time and again, Yahweh punishes not only the guilty, but entire populations, including children, animals, and future generations. In 2 Samuel 24, King David conducts a census, something Yahweh apparently didn't want. His response? He offers David a choice of punishments, all of which involve the death of thousands. David chooses a plague, and 70,000 Israelites die. Not David, the people, innocents. Or consider the story of Jericho in Joshua 6. After the city's walls fall, The Israelites devote to destruction every man, woman, child, and animal. The only survivors are a prostitute named Rahab and her family, because she betrayed her own people to help the invaders. Is this the behavior of a just God? Or is it the brutal logic of holy war? Tribalism over universal morality. Yahweh's commandments often make sense only within the tribal context of ancient Israel. He favors the Israelites not because of universal principles, but because they are his people. Everyone else is expendable. This favoritism is stark in texts like Deuteronomy 7 verse 6. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession, not because you were more in number, but because the Lord loves you. That sounds touching, until you realize that this love translates into total annihilation for other groups. The Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, all were to be wiped out, so that the Israelites could take their land. Today, we reject racism, xenophobia, and ethnic cleansing, but the Old Testament presents them as divine mandates. Moral confusion, arbitrary laws, and disproportionate punishments. Yahweh's legal code is often contradictory, arbitrary, or morally indefensible by today's standards. In Leviticus, eating shellfish is an abomination. Touching a woman during her period makes someone unclean. Working on the Sabbath merits the death penalty. A man who rapes a virgin is required to marry her and pay her father money. Slavery is accepted and regulated. These are not examples of enlightened morality. They reflect the values of a primitive, patriarchal society, not the timeless wisdom of a benevolent deity. The rational disconnect. Faced with these texts, many believers respond by saying, "That was the Old Testament. The New Testament is about love and grace." But this evades the problem. The God of the Old Testament is the same God worshipped by modern Christians and Jews. He is supposed to be unchanging, eternal. If Yahweh once commanded genocide, favored certain tribes, and killed children, what does that say about his nature? Others argue that these actions were necessary for the time. But morality that changes based on context is not divine morality. It's situational ethics. And it suggests that Yahweh is not above human logic, but subject to it. Then there are those who claim we cannot understand God's ways, that his actions are beyond our comprehension. But this argument nullifies the entire concept of morality. If we cannot judge actions as good or evil, what basis is there for calling God good at all? Why do people still worship this God? The answer, for many, lies not in reason but in tradition. People are raised to believe in Yahweh, taught from childhood that he is loving and just. They are discouraged from reading the Bible critically or questioning its moral framework. Religious institutions often emphasize the comforting parts, the Psalms, the stories of deliverance, while glossing over the genocides, the cruelty, the injustice. There is also fear. Fear of punishment, fear of hell, fear of being wrong. Yahweh is not just a God of love. He is a God who punishes disbelief. To question him is, in many traditions, to risk eternal damnation. But fear is not a sound foundation for moral worship, nor is ignorance. A call for honest reflection. In the modern world, we have access to education, historical context, and ethical reasoning. We are no longer bound to accept ancient texts at face value. If we are to grow as a species, morally, intellectually, spiritually, we must be willing to examine the gods we worship. Is Yahweh truly worthy of devotion? Or are people projecting their own values onto a character who, by his own recorded deeds, fails to meet the most basic standards of justice and compassion? To answer that, we must read the Old Testament with open eyes, not as believers looking to justify, but as human beings seeking truth. Because if the God we worship is capable of commanding genocide, punishing innocents, and demanding absolute obedience, then maybe it's time we stop calling him good. If this made you think, just imagine what's coming next. Give it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing. Your support helps us keep questioning the unquestionable. Thanks for being here.